Welcome to the Athenaeum of Philadelphia. It's a delight to see you all here. We have members, we have visitors, people may be here for your first time. It's so good to see you all. We have some current and former board members here as well. Raise your hand or if you're a current or former board member. If you can see one around you, Jeffrey, our board, there you go, is our current board president. If you want to know more about the Athenaeum and what we do after this program, if you're new or if you're a member and you'd just like to know more, here are board members. You can talk to them. Ned, former board member, Nancy Moses, and Jeffrey Cooper. I'm Beth Hessel, the executive director, and it's a pleasure to have you all here tonight at the Athenaeum. If you are a part of our community, you know that we are a place full of folks who have had amazing life journeys, whether they are 22 or 92 or somewhere in between. Having conversations here leads you down new paths of knowledge and knowing. We are also a library that has been circulating books and knowledge since 1814 here in Philadelphia. We are indeed an anchor in our community. We have members who are here tonight who joined as soon as they put a contract on a home and were moving into the area because they knew they wanted to be a part of this place. It is an exciting place to be, and one of the things that we love about the Athenaeum are our film conversations. And Carrie Rickey, who is with us tonight, has been leading those for quite a few years. You'd already started before I started here in 2019. So at least 6 or 7 years, she has been leading these scintillating conversations where she introduces a film, you watch it together, and then engage in a very spirited conversation, which I can usually hear from my office downstairs. So I know good stuff is happening.
We're
very rowdy. Very rowdy, and she has great choice in movies that you get to watch, and it is part of the ways that we support the growth of useful knowledge, which was what our founders wanted people to have access to. You may have seen in July a review of Carrie's book that she's been working on for quite a while on Agnes Varda in the New York Times, where Dwight Garner says, the film critic Carrie Rickey, in her compact new biography, A Complicated Passion, delivers perceptive readings of Varda's movies, and she charts how Varda had to scramble in a male-dominated film world to get them made. Dwight says, I devoured the book. It sent me rushing, he said, to the Criterion Channel to watch Varda's movies. I think that's about as good a promotion you can have for her book, which is on sale with Head House Books in the reading room afterwards. So after the talk, you will be invited back there. Buy a copy, buy several, buy one for everybody you know who is who loves movies and wants to understand better someone who truly helped influence the development of the French New Wave and filmmakers who came after. But right now, we are very lucky to have our very own Carrie Rickey here tonight at the Athenaeum of Philadelphia to talk about her new book, and I invite you all to join me in a warm welcome.
Good evening. I'm very, very happy to be here because, like many of you, this is my library away from home and home away from home, where I very much enjoy showing movies and sharing them and discussing them with members. Tonight, I'll talk briefly about my book, A Complicated Passion. And then I'll show you a short film, 12 minutes, which should give you a little bit of the flavor of Varda's movies. And after that, I'll take your questions. And then should you like to buy the book, well, as Beth told you, it's available across the hall. So who is Agnes Varda? How many of you have seen a Varda movie? Wow. You're the best audience I've had in a month. Pardon me? Oh. Varda was born in Belgium in 1928 and raised in France. She was a 5-foot giant who first distinguished herself as a still photographer, then decided photographs were too still, and she, without really having seen many movies, she made a movie which she had no idea how to edit. So her producer put her in touch with a documentary filmmaker in Paris named Alain Resnais. You may have seen some of his movies, but she made a feature film before he did, and she really influenced his first feature, his first feature, Hiroshima Mon Amour. As a filmmaker, she was award-winning. She had the most crowded trophy cabinet in the history of movies. She won awards from every major film festival, an Oscar, several César awards, you name it. But then she progressed in the last 2 decades of her life to become the creator of very immersive art installations. Effectively, she evolved from still images to moving to 3-dimensional environments. So she was always kind of adding a dimension to her art. Though she was billed as the so-called godmother of the new wave, even though she was almost a decade younger than Resnais and not much older than Jean-Luc Godard or François Truffaut, it took a long time for her to command the respect of the male-dominated world of movie making, where she enjoyed a 65-year career, the longest for any woman director. By the time she passed away at age 90, in 2019, she had risen to a kind of secular sainthood, celebrated by 3 different generations, respectively as a pioneer, as the godmother of the new wave, as a disruptor, as someone who made movies that didn't look like anyone else's and just weren't conventional, and her last stage, an influencer, before those words had the valence that they do now. Upon her death, she was heralded for films that illustrated how the world is tilted against women, against refugees, against the underfed, and the unhoused. Fashionistas cavilled over her whimsical 2-tone natural gray and mulberry-dyed hair, and her coordinating fuchsia ensembles. Directors and movie critics rhapsodized about her films that blurred the boundaries between documentary and fiction, and they were always a few beats ahead of the zeitgeist. And most of all, many of us appreciated her because there were women in her films. Not all the French New Wave or American movies or German movies or Japanese movies had women in them that were anything more than decorative. The thing that most surprised me about researching the book was decades before the introduction of the internet, Varda was a one-woman social network. Her friends included Susan Sontag and Simone de Beauvoir, allies in the anti-war and feminist movements of the 60s and 70s. They included Huey Newton, who was the subject of her 1968 documentary Black Panther. And they included a UCLA dropout, film school dropout, Jim Morrison, who is much better known as the frontman of The Doors. In 1966, she shot a trailer, what we would now call a sizzle reel, a scene to kind of get an investor to produce her film, with a 16-year-old street tough named Gerard Depardieu. He didn't get hired immediately for films, although Varda really pushed his career quite hard, but he did become her daughter's babysitter for a few years. 2 years later in California, where she made many movies, she made a screen test of a carpenter named Harrison Ford and tried to get Columbia Pictures to make a movie that starred him, but the head of the studio said, he'll never amount to anything. Small but mighty, Varda captivated everyone with her indefatigable creative energy and her absurdist sense of humor. In both the United States and France, she would hire female cinematographers, composers, editors, assistants, in order for them to get their union cards so they could work in the movies. Madonna approached Varda to cast her in an American remake of Varda's most famous early film, Cléo from 5 to 7. Alas, it never happened. Like Varda herself, her photographs, her movies, and her artworks are singular and made me want to write about them. Yet, directors are more than their filmographies. Artists are more than a list of the works in the exhibition. And Varda is fascinating because she didn't make work like anyone else. Nor is, her process was different from other directors. And also, the finished works were never like those of anyone else. These are two reasons why she was likely overlooked or undervalued for long parts of her career. During her early years as a filmmaker, Varda made films from her own scripts. She disdained the adaptation of novels or plays. She didn't think that was fair. They were one medium. Movies, to her, were a very different medium. They were, for her, a hybrid media of imagery, words, rhythm, music, and she had a name for that. She called it cinécriture, or film writing, that you had to think in terms of dialogue, you had to think in terms of composition, you had to think in terms of what the sets were made of to kind of reinforce what the intention of the movies were. And very much unlike her husband, Jacques Demy, whose name you might recall from his movie, The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, Demy hated any improvisation on his sets. For one thing, he made many musicals, so the dialogue and the music had to be very carefully timed, and he didn't want anyone to kind of interfere with his work. But for Varda, improvisation just energized her on the set, even though it kind of irritated some of her collaborators who didn't want to do a retake. As Michelangelo believed that in every block of stone there was a form dying to come out, Varda believed that every story she told in a movie had an inherent structure she had to discover. One of her most famous discoveries happened in 2000, or actually 1999. She was at her farmer's market where she noticed several people after the market was closed who stooped down to pick up stray pieces of lettuce or bruised vegetables and fruit that hadn't been sold. And they reminded her of the Gleaners in Millet's painting, The Gleaners. And so to make her 2000 film, The Gleaners and I, she decided she would go out and research it like a journalist. And she would find the story of why the Gleaners were doing what they did. And what she found, she had also adopted digital technology. She was 70 years old, or actually 72 years old. And she didn't want to hide behind a camera and interview people. So she got this digital camera that weighed less than her first view camera. And she was able to get up close to people and establish a relationship with them. And they just trusted her because she was interested in them. And she got amazing stories of why people gleaned. Some were gypsies and not allowed in certain towns. They'd been barred and had to live at the edge of town. Some were students who didn't really have the money for food. Some owned vineyards but allowed people to glean the grapes after the first harvest. And there was all kinds of reasons that people who were unhoused set their tents up near farmlands so they could glean and feed their families. She also turned the camera on herself because she was a gleaner too. She was a lover of flea markets, of junk stores, because she truly believed that one woman's junk was another one's treasure. And she took us inside her house and showed us all these things she'd gotten off the street and in garbage cans. But most of all, she showed herself that she was an explorer of the human impact of food insecurity, waste, and the way agribusiness decided that fruits and vegetables had to be of a standard size and very clean, like museum objects instead of food. It was groundbreaking both in its making and its telling, and Gleaners made Varda a hero to a rising eco-conscious generation. Like the stories she was so keen to find, by her final decade, Varda had found herself at the center of an unexpected structure, the mainstream. She became embraced and feted everywhere she went. For decades, a prophet without disciples, suddenly she was besieged by them. Thus, the godmother of the new wave, long the only woman in its ranks, and frankly, uneasily admitted into its pantheon, was no longer ahead of its time. She was firmly within it. With the help of hair dye and flowing hippie duds, she created a new persona, that of the punk grandma. Mamita Punk is what her grandsons called her. After years of being marginalized or invisible, she accepted this late life recognition as a welcome distraction from her struggles with macular degeneration and breast cancer. And she worked until 3 days before she died. Researching her life, I found how hard she had fought to reach this final stage of universal acclaim, which included an honorary Oscar given to her by Angelina Jolie, who became a director herself, she said, because of Varda's example. 5 months ago, in April, Varda's canonization was complete. She now had a likeness on a French stamp. So I am going to ask Beth to turn off the lights and Christina to start the movie. It's called The So-Called Caryatides It will have subtitles, and it'll give you an example of Varda, who thought a movie doesn't have to be 2 hours long. It doesn't need stars. Sometimes the stars are concretized in architecture. This is her own production company, Cine Tamaris, with a picture of her favorite cat. It's very racy.
Le nu dans la rue est plus souvent en bronze qu'en peau humaine, plus souvent en pierre qu'en chair. Et l'on voit sans étonnement des dames dévêtues éclairer des trottoirs ou décorer des immeubles de façon gracieuse et lascive.
Dis-moi, Vénus, quel plaisir trouves-tu à faire ainsi cascader, cascader ma vertu? Dis-moi, Vénus, quel plaisir trouves-tu à faire ainsi cascader, cascader ma vertu?
J'aime, plus encore que les coquines, femmes fleurs, sirènes pâles ou bronzées, j'aime les statues servant de colonnes humaines. Les porteuses de portes ou de linteaux, de chapiteaux ou de balcons, les dites cariatides. Vitruve, architecte romain, raconte leur origine. Les Cariates, habitants de Carie, ville du Péloponnèse, s'étaient joints aux Perses qui faisaient la guerre aux autres peuples de la Grèce. Les Grecs, vainqueurs des Perses, se vengèrent des Cariates collabos et détruisirent la ville. Les hommes furent passés au fil de l'épée et les femmes emmenées comme esclaves. On les fit défiler en cortège comme un butin de guerre exhibé triomphalement, du moins les dames de qualité, avec leurs belles robes et leurs ornements. Et pour montrer comment on avait puni les femmes d'une ville traître, les architectes de ce temps-là, au lieu de colonnes, mirent ces sortes de statues aux édifices publics. L'anecdote a été oubliée. Les cariatides étaient nés. Nous ne verrons dans ce film que les Parisiennes, et plus précisément celles de la fin du XIXe siècle. Elles vont par deux, drapées ou nues, souvent l'une demi-nue, l'autre pas. Elles sont symétriques, mais jamais identiques. À part une exception avenue de Tourville où l'on peut voir un couple mixte de colonnes humaines, on rencontre à Paris une dizaine de presque jumeaux et une cinquantaine de presque jumelles. Il y a même des triplés quand il s'agit de soutenir le lourd fronton d'une grosse banque. Les 4 femmes colonnes sont devenues 12. C'est seul et avec une seule main que celui-ci porte un immeuble. Les cariatides mâles s'appellent des atlantes, en souvenir d'Atlas qui portait le monde sur son dos. Mon papa c'est le plus fort et ma maman c'est la plus jolie. Les statuaires le disent aussi. Les hommes sont forts, sont musclés. Alors il faut que le muscle se voie, que l'effort se voie, que la tension du visage se voie. L'Atlante exprime la force et la puissance. Les femmes, quand elles portent, le font plutôt sur la tête et l'air de rien. Une femme avec un panier sur la tête, c'est déjà une sculpture calme. J'en ai souvent photographié dans mes voyages, au Portugal par exemple. C'est bien clair, la cariatide ne témoigne pas du fait de porter, ni de l'effort. La cariatide est une certaine idée de la femme en architecture. Le retour à l'Antiquité, qui est cyclique, était de nouveau à la mode. Le comte de Lille écrivait des poèmes antiques, et Théodore de Banville faisait paraître son premier recueil, Les Cariatides. Mais c'est précisément entre 1860 et 1870 qu'elles apparaissent sur les immeubles pendant cette décade prodigieuse qui a aussi produit Les Misérables de Hugo, La Belle Hélène d'Offenbach, Le Capital de Karl Marx, L'éducation sentimentale de Flaubert, Les Derniers de la Croix et les premiers Manet qui faisaient scandale, comme Les Fleurs du Mal de Baudelaire, le poète des poètes, celui qui a chanté les femmes et la douleur comme personne. Je suis belle, ô mortel, comme un rêve de pierre, et mon sein où chacun s'est meurtri tour à tour est fait pour inspirer au poète un amour éternel et muet, ainsi que la matière. Je suis belle et j'ordonne que pour l'amour de moi vous n'aimiez que le beau. Je suis l'ange gardien, la muse et la madone. Que diras-tu ce soir, pauvre âme solitaire? Que diras-tu, mon cœur, cœur autrefois flétri, à la très belle, à la très bonne, à la très chère dont le regard divin t'a soudain refleuri. Baudelaire courtise Madame Sabatier depuis des années. Il lui a envoyé des poèmes, anonymes d'abord, puis signés. Et puis, un soir, après une séance du procès suscitée par la parution des Fleurs du Mal, Madame Sabatier se donne au poète. Le lendemain, il lui écrit une lettre de rupture. Il y a quelques jours, tu étais une divinité, ce qui est si commode, ce qui est si beau, si inviolable. Te voilà femme maintenant. On en pleurerait. Mais je pleure encore plus sur les 2 dernières années de Baudelaire. En 1866, il a 45 ans, il est célèbre, mais pauvre, usé, aigri, malade. Il tombe dans une église et reste hémiplégique et aphasique. Il est muet. Il arrive quand même à articuler « crénon » de crénon. 18 mois plus tard, il meurt, toujours muet. Ange plein de gaieté, connaissez-vous l'angoisse, la honte, les remords, les sanglots, les ennuis et les vagues terreurs de ces affreuses nuits qui compriment le cœur comme un papier qu'on froisse? Ange plein de gaieté, connaissez-vous l'angoisse? Ange plein de bonté, connaissez-vous la haine, les poings crispés dans l'ombre et les larmes de fiel? Quand la vengeance bat son infernal rappel et de nos facultés se fait le capitaine? Ange plein de bonté, connaissez-vous la haine? Cet ange étrange, au 57 rue Turbigo, se remarque à peine quand on sort de l'immeuble qui abrite les bureaux de l'inscription au fichier des mal logés ou de l'aide aux petits propriétaires fonciers. Les gens du quartier, quand on parle avec eux, ne semblent pas avoir remarqué cette géante de cariatide, ou ne se posent pas de questions sur son cas. On sait seulement que la victoire de Turbigo date de 1859 et qu'elle a donné son nom à la rue. Ou alors c'est une enseigne de passementerie à cause du sac en forme de gland de rideau. On l'a appelée la dame au sac, ou la fortune au brin de myrrhe, ou l'ange du bizarre. Mais on ne sait pas qui a fait cette cariatide, ni ce qu'elle représente. Masque ou décor, salut, j'adore ta beauté.
Okay. I will answer any of your questions right now, but I want to pose one to you, all of you. What do you think, or why do you think Varda made this movie, and what points do you think she was trying to make? Does anyone have an idea?
That women are all around us, but we don't see them.
This answer was that women are all around us, but we don't see them. I think that's part of it. Can you stand up and talk so people can hear you in the room? That women are the strength and foundation of the world. I think she's showing that Yes, but she's also showing that the men are depicted with strength and the women are depicted with beauty and nudity. Men are draped, men are strong and muscular, and women can hold up a whole building with a little bit of their head. But then she shows us real women who are also doing the work, but they're not, why aren't they shown as muscular and straining? And why do you think she was making this point? Because she always wanted the audience, she didn't tell the audience what to think, she wants us to think about it and come to some conclusion. Yes, can you stand up and comment?
I think like the Baudelaire comparison was interesting because he, I guess, was like a poet that wrote about urbanism and public space, and but also did have this kind of like disparaging way of talking about those that didn't have power, and so I think kind of exploring the like Bill's environment through his work in this kind of like ironic way and juxtaposing like images of actual people on the street and like the Bill's environment through his voice like brings kind of, yeah, some irony to it.
This is going to be very hard to say succinctly, but this observer is saying that Varda is using the words of Baudelaire, who spoke of modern architecture with great perception, but also spoke of women with, women were goddesses before they were had in sex, and then they became just women. And yes, I think that's true too. And do we have any men who have any? Are there no men who have an observation of this? Okay. I think. That's my husband, so I'm sure he has thoughts about architecture. I see no. Yes.
I think she's also thinking about herself in terms of the nature of creation and obscurity too.
Thank you. This observer says she was thinking of herself and of the nature of obscurity, and I forgot the other word. Creativity and obscurity. Yes, I think so. I think she's also thinking of the French movie industry, which, as she was coming up in the New Wave, as the godmother of the New Wave, the women in the movies of her male colleagues were often cast for their beauty, but the men had the meaty, strong, emotional, dramatic parts. And I think this movie is about the gender gap in architecture as well as in the movie business, as well as the different ways that maybe female strength and male strength are looked at in popular culture. But I don't know. Who am I to say? Yes, sir. Thank you for being brave. Stand up, please.
So I have more of a question.
Okay.
Observational question. So she's focusing on a certain period of French history.
Yes.
The 1860s, the 1870s, and it's related to this architecture, but it's also related to poetry and other cultural
Phenomenon. Yeah.
phenomenon with that. And I wonder if you could comment on that specifically in terms of something about that period that the rest of us might not be familiar with.
Well, 1870 is a pretty important date in French history. It's the Franco-Prussian War, and when the Prussians were victorious. I think we have many people in here who know more about French history than I do, but I think it was certainly architecturally a way of, an era of celebrating female beauty in painting, in sculpture, but also not celebrating female intellect or strength or fights for, I mean, we see 30 years before liberty leading the people in the great French painting. And liberty is full of strength and leadership, but that's not the kind of women who are in the caryatids. Yes, Ned.
1870.
Stand up, please.
1870 is also just 25 years after the beautification of Paris, which was done in this, neoclassical style that we all love. But, when you throw in Baudelaire into the mix, plus the two real women she captures in this film, she's referring to the real grittiness of life as it is, and the silent but critical role that women play as compared to that idealized classical woman who is plastered on all buildings. So, I guess, as you're saying, this is a statement about what film industry has done in trying to support these old stereotypes when real life is something very different.
Also, this is very hard observation to telescope in a sentence, but the observer is saying it's hard to, the 1870 is 25 years after France dedicated itself to the beautification of Paris. And we got these beautiful neoclassical buildings, but they were not representative of perhaps the grittier Paris and real people. Is that a fair? Okay. Yes. Could you stand up?
I also thought that maybe by choosing Baudelaire, she was also saying that both poets and filmmakers make you look at things that you passed by daily in a different way. That you probably went to that building where the two caryatids,
Caryatids.
held the world, like the Greek caryatids held the world. To say that you have to understand the beauty that surrounds you on a very directly, that you have to understand what you're walking through and what the messages are, what you're walking through, the streets, the buildings you enter. The film and the poem will lead you to that. And that's the role of the artist. It's to make you see things that you took for granted, perhaps. I don't know, I saw it as a beautiful way of saying, look again.
That's also a great observation. This observer says that she chose the caryatids and the poetry of Baudelaire to say, look more carefully, be more conscious of what you're walking by, and think again. It's not just wallpaper. It's not, it's meant, we're meant to think about our environment and think about this. I agree. Yes.
She shows us all the statue, and then she shows us this naked man, which is odd. This man walking in Paris.
Well, but the men on the buildings are covered and draped, but the real man is not. And she's flipping the script on us.
The poem that she uses is, the poem is called La Beauté, Beauty. And Baudelaire, through the poem, analyzed what beauty is. And if I remember correctly, it's something cold, like a statue. Then she tells us the story that Baudelaire was very much in love with Madame Sabatier, and then one day he has sex with her, and then he doesn't want to see her again. And then he dies. I think he dies of venereal disease.
She doesn't share that, though.
But she tells you, Agnes Varda tells you the story. And I think in some way it's relevant. Why is she telling us this story? Why is she choosing this poem to illustrate all the statue? And then tells us the story of Baudelaire that ends up in madness.
Why do you think she shows the naked man and tells the story of Baudelaire?
I think that the naked man in the street is something that she often does in her movie. It's for the shock effect
And for humor.
and for humor. I think in the beaches of Agnes Varda, she shows an old woman with hanging breast, and she takes a picture, and it has that same shock value. So she's telling us something.
Thank you. Okay, this is the last comment on this, because okay, stand up.
I'm just curious to, as you look at that.
Can you stand?
Filming the statues is always from the ground up and looking up to them and unveiling them. And kind of like you don't know what you're looking at first until you then it's revealed. And it seemed pretty pointed that she was doing that in every shot.
And this observer is saying that she frames her shots from bottom and up, so we see parts and then the whole. Yes, and she makes us more aware of this. My favorite moment in the movie is when that woman comes out with a bread spread, a real woman working between these two frozen beauties that are very carefree and are posing. So there's a lot of, I think, wry humor in the way she looks.
I just have one comment.
Okay, stand up.
What kept coming to me is the story of Rodin and Camille Claudel.
Well, that's a very long story for me. This observer is seeing the story of the sculptor Rodin and his student and lover, and also a great sculptor, Camille Claudel, who wanted him to commit to her, and he didn't, and she went mad, and her family maybe accelerated her madness. So, but that's a very long story. Okay. I've read different versions of this, but thank you. She didn't go mad. They put her in the, yeah. Okay, we have 10 minutes of Q&A now about, yeah, they considered her mad because she was challenging the patriarchy, maybe. But I wasn't a doctor there, but in any case. Are there any questions about Varda, her movies? Okay.
Well, I just wanted to ask, I know that her studio, I think it was Tamara's studio, was near the Observatoire behind the Luxembourg Gardens in Paris. I mean, what's happened since her death in terms of the estate, her archive, or her children involved with preserving it?
Okay, I believe I don't think it was anywhere near the Observatoire. She worked out of 86, 88 Rue Daguerre in the 14th arrondissement in Montparnasse, and she did a lot of her work there. She also had, it was a street when she moved there in 1951. It was a street of small, bakers, tailors, grocers, hair salons, and she felt she herself was one of these workers. She wasn't the candle maker, but she was a movie maker, and she set up a little store across the street from her home where you could watch her through the window cutting her movies, selling her DVDs, because she really considered herself an artisan. And she wasn't very snobby or highfalutin about what she did. She felt that she was an artisan. And yes, her son and daughter now live at Rue Daguerre on each side of the courtyard buildings that were originally, I think, a cheese store and a framing shop. And when Varda moved in 1951, it had Turkish toilets in the courtyard, or latrines. And over the years, she improved the apartment, and now it's kind of, Montparnasse is a more ritzy place. It's kind of like Soho now. But in any case, are there any other questions about, yes, can you stand up?
How is the film shown? How do people get to see this at this length?
Oh, this movie or all of her movies? There's a wonderful thing called the Criterion Collection. They both produce DVDs that you can buy online, and they have a channel that you can hook up your TV to. And they have the great movies of the great directors like Ingmar Bergman, Agnes Varda, Dreyer, all the great directors you can find there. And it's an amazing film library, founded on Janus Films, which used to import European and Asian films and distribute them, and it's a national treasure of America. They've restored all these movies, and you could see them as they were meant to be seen. Yes.
I was curious about what interested you about that in 5 minutes or less. But I mean, what about her work or her person interested you?
I saw my first Agnes Varda movie at age 18 in a film class at the University of California, San Diego. And my professor, Manny Farber, said, we're going to see a movie by this French director, Agnes Varda. I think he was trying to pronounce her name correctly the French way, which would be Agnes. But I just thought it was Agnes Varda. And then I saw the credits, and it was Agnes Varda, as I would have said, being an American. And I started crying. I never knew a woman could direct a movie, or had directed a movie. And I never consciously knew. And I started crying, and like, wow, how long has this been going on? So from my first encounter with Agnes, I, um, I liked her, and I really liked the movie because it had a very beautiful woman at its center, but she was, at the beginning of the movie, she's taken a biopsy and she's waiting for her cancer biopsy. And all she can think of is she's going to be disfigured, men won't look at her anymore, she won't be this beautiful object. And then over the course of this 90-minute movie that seems to be taking place in real time, she goes from this narcissistic flibbertigibbet to someone who wants to connect with the outside world and she's just no longer there to be looked at. She wants to do the looking herself, and she wants to connect with other people. And it's like she ceases being the object. And it was very exciting for me. I didn't know that, and many people would call this essentialist, but at the time, I thought, God, maybe women look at things differently from men. That's what I thought. So that was what hooked me initially on Varda, but then I became a film critic and I reviewed a lot of her movies, most of which I liked very much. And I also liked the idea that I could tell the story of other female filmmakers who, at the beginning of movies, in 1896, the first feature film, like non-documentary film, was made by a woman named Alice Guy Blanchet, a French woman. And she was lost to history until in the 1990s, a French-American journalist named Joan Dupont saw some of her movies and said, wow, did anyone know about this? Did anyone know that she made over 1,000 movies and et cetera, et cetera? And there were a lot of women in America as well who were filmmakers. And for some reason, they all got erased from history. And the interesting thing, what I knew about Varda is that she started producing her own movies so she could, as the saying goes, own the means of production and own the end product of production. And so she bought back her movies that other entities owned, so she could distribute that, and then so she could make all the money from them. And so I think she just did it because she thought it was important and she didn't want to be erased. And that's what it takes. So I admire that about her too. Well, the first time I met her in real life, the Philadelphia Inquirer had sent me to Cannes for the festival, and the Unifrance, the export agency for French movies, had all the American critics for lunch, and Agnes and I were the only two women there in this crowd of French directors and American critics. And she looked at me and she said, I was hoping for the New York Times. I get the Philadelphia Inquirer. But she realized, like a couple minutes later, I didn't know whether to be angry or just to, shrug my shoulders. And she said, spell your last name. And I spelled it for her, and she said, I read your article on the LA muralists while I was making my movie, what was it called? No, Murmure. Murmure. It was a movie about LA muralists. And so in her eyes, I maybe wasn't the New York Times, but we shared interests. So we began talking. So do we have another minute or two? Two more questions. Okay. Yes.
It's not so much a question as much as it is, I just think her sort of final act was her collaboration with J.R., the international artist, who I think shared a lot of the same values. And can you speak to that? Because I don't know if everybody knows. It was just a brilliant
It was actually the second to the last movie. But in any case, I don't want to be a pedant, but I am. Her daughter wanted to encourage the younger generation to like Agnes, because in the same way that the Gleaners and I really, rediscovered her. Her daughter Rosalie very much liked J.R., or J.R., as they say in France, his mural-sized photographs of working people. And she thought it would be a really interesting collaboration with her mother, to go to places where there was political struggles, political victories for unionists and dock workers, et cetera, and it was a really, I think, very beautiful movie, mostly on the part of Agnes, whose narration ties everything together and connects and reaches out to the audience, as well as she's interviewing the people. JR doesn't do much but look cool, I mean, he's taking photographs, but it's really, I think it's her movie, basically, with his production possibilities, because he takes pictures of people or groups of people and then enlarges them to mural size. And they're very fascinating and beautiful. And is there anyone who hasn't asked a question yet? Who wants? Okay.
What is her last movie?
It's called Varda par Agnes, Varda by Agnes, which is also the title of one of her memoirs, and it can be confusing. But she wanted to leave something to share her ideas about movie making, and it's basically her manifesto about what art is and what movies are, and it's her lecturing different audiences about what she thinks, and it's very, very moving. And I think recently her family asked the Board of Education or the French educational system to show this movie to young people as part of their art class. So they hear someone who's not very pontificatory, if that's a word, talk about what creation is like, and that making art is to be shared. And that's about it.
Thank you to Carrie. Books are on sale at Head House Books right over here across the hallway. I am taking Carrie over there. So all of you I know have things you want to say. Go buy a book and wait in line and talk to her there. I'm going to get her over. I'm her bodyguard right now. But thank you all for coming. We'll see you at more programs soon.